That low, steady hum that rises with speed is one of the most expensive, maybe, noises on a small car. You turn the radio up, you convince yourself it's the tires, you tell yourself you'll deal with it later. Then one day it gets louder, the steering feels a little vague, and you start wondering if you're one pothole away from a real problem. If you're here for wheel bearing replacement on Suzuki Swift, the tricky part isn't unbolting things. The tricky part is not ruining a brand new bearing before the car even leaves the driveway. Because that happens all the time. People install a fresh bearing, the noise is gone, and 2 weeks later it's back, sometimes worse. Not because the bearing was cheap, but because one force went through the wrong place during installation, or because the axle nut preload ended up wrong. So let's do this the way a careful shop would do it, but in plain language. First, confirm it's actually a bearing and which corner it is. Second, figure out what bearing setup your Swift has before you order parts. Third, tear down without damaging the ABS sensor or the knuckle. And finally, press and torque it in a way that doesn't silently kill the new bearing. Start with diagnosis, because it saves money and time. A wheel bearing noise is usually a smooth humming or growling that changes with vehicle speed, not engine RPM. If you rev the engine in neutral and the sound doesn't change, that points away from the engine and toward rotating parts at the wheels. But tires can mimic bearings perfectly, especially if they're cupped or unevenly worn. Brakes can also drag and make a grinding or rubbing sound that comes and goes. The simplest road test is a gentle load shift. On a safe, empty road, at a steady speed where the noise is obvious, make a very mild lane change style weave. Nothing aggressive. When you steer left, you load the right side of the car. When you steer right, you load the left side. A bad bearing often gets louder when it's loaded and quieter when it's unloaded. So if the noise gets louder on a left steer, suspect the right side. If it gets louder on a right steer, suspect the left side. This isn't perfect, but it's a strong clue. Now, don't fall into the trap of thinking the louder side is always the bad side. Sound travels through the body and suspension. Sometimes a rear bearing sounds like it's in the front. Sometimes the opposite. That's why you combine the road test with a hands-on check. Jack the car safely and support it on stands. Don't rely on the jack. With the wheel off the ground, grab the tire at 12 and 6 o'clock and rock it in and out. Then grab at 9 and 3 and do the same. If you feel play, you need to interpret it. Play at 12 and 6 can be a bearing, but it can also be a ball joint. Play at 9 and 3 can be a bearing, but it can also be a tie rod. If you have a helper, have them press the brake pedal while you rock the wheel. If the play changes significantly with the brake applied, that can point toward bearing or hub issues versus suspension joints, because the brake locks the hub and changes what can move. Also spin the wheel by hand. A bad bearing sometimes feels rough, notchy, or makes a dry, sandy sound. But don't expect it to always be obvious. Some bearings are noisy only under load at speed and feel fine in the air. Before you buy parts, you need one more decision: what bearing design is on your specific Suzuki Swift at the corner you're fixing. This is where people lose days. Some setups use a press-in bearing in the steering knuckle, with a separate hub pressed through it. Others use a bolt-on hub assembly. Rear setups can be different from front setups, and ABS can change what you see. Here's the practical way to identify it without getting lost in model year trivia. Look behind the brake rotor at the back of the knuckle. If you see a flange with several bolts that clearly hold the hub/bearing unit to the knuckle from the backside, that's typically a bolt-on hub assembly. If you don't see that, and instead the hub looks like it's part of a pressed arrangement through the knuckle, you're likely dealing with a press-in bearing and a snap ring. Another clue is the presence of a large snap ring on the inboard side of the knuckle bore. You usually won't see it until you're partly disassembled, but if your replacement part listing includes a snap ring, that's a hint you're pressing. ABS matters because there may be a tone ring or magnetic encoder built into the bearing seal, and the sensor sits close to it. If you damage the sensor, crack it, or pack it with metal debris, you can end up with an ABS light and a new problem. If you install the bearing the wrong way around on a design that has a magnetic encoder on one side, you can also get ABS faults even though the bearing is mechanically fine. So as you disassemble, pay attention to where the sensor is and what side of the bearing faces it. Now let's talk tools, because this job is either straightforward or miserable depending on what you have. At minimum you need solid jack stands, a breaker bar, a torque wrench that can handle axle nut torque, basic sockets and wrenches, and a way to retract and hang the brake caliper without stressing the hose. For pressing bearings, you need either a shop press or a quality on-car bearing press kit that can push the bearing in and out with threaded rods and correctly sized rifts. You also need snap ring pliers that actually fit the snap ring holes, not the tiny universal ones that slip and make you angry. You'll also want penetrating oil, a wire brush or abrasive pad for cleaning rust, and ideally a way to heat stubborn parts carefully if corrosion is heavy. And you should plan on replacing the axle nut if your Swift uses a staked or deformed thread style nut. Many do. Reusing it is one of those, it worked for me, shortcuts that can cost you a bearing. One more thing before teardown, loosen the axle nut with the car on the ground. It's much easier and safer. If it's staked, you need to unstake it first by driving the stake portion out of the groove with a punch. Don't just muscle it, you can damage threads. With the wheel on and someone pressing the brake, crack the nut loose. Then raise the car, remove the wheel, and continue. Now the disassembly sequence. Remove the brake caliper and bracket as needed, and hang the caliper so the hose isn't supporting weight. Remove the rotor. If the rotor is stuck, don't beat on it like you're trying to break concrete. Use the threaded extraction holes if it has them, or gentle taps around the head while rotating, or a bit of penetrating oil at the hub face. The goal is to keep things controlled. Next, locate the ABS sensor if equipped. This is a big one, don't pry on it, don't twist it aggressively, and don't use it as a handle. If it's held by a small bolt, remove the bolt and gently work the sensor out. If it's seized in place, sometimes the safest move is to leave the sensor in the knuckle and just unclip the wiring so it's not strained. Breaking an ABS sensor because it's stuck in corrosion is painfully common. If you do remove it, clean the bore lightly and keep the sensor tip clean. Now you need to separate the knuckle from the suspension enough to get the hub and bearing out, depending on your setup. Typically that means disconnecting the tie rod end, the lower ball joint, and possibly the strut to knuckle bolts. The exact combination depends on access and whether you're using an on-car press kit. If you're taking the knuckle to a shop press, you'll remove the knuckle completely. If you're pressing on the car, you may leave the knuckle in place but you still need room and straight alignment for the press tools. When separating joints, avoid hammering directly on threads. Use the correct puller or strike the side of the knuckle at the taper boss to pop the taper loose, while keeping the nut loosely threaded to catch it. Controlled force beats brute force. Once the axle is free from the hub, push the axle stub back through. If it's stuck, don't mushroom the axle by hammering on it. Use a proper pusher tool or thread the nut on flush to protect threads and use gentle taps, or use a puller. If it's really seized, that's a sign corrosion has bonded the splines, and forcing it can damage the CV joint. Sometimes the smartest move is to soak it, apply heat carefully to the hub area, and work it patiently. Now we are at the point where the job becomes either a clean bearing replacement or a bearing murder scene. The number one repeat failure mistake is pressing force through the wrong race. Bearings are designed to take load in specific ways. When you press a bearing into a knuckle, the press force must go through the outer race, because the outer race is what's being fitted into the knuckle bore. If you press on the inner race while the outer race is being forced into the knuckle, you transmit force through the balls or rollers and dent the raceways. That denting is called brinelling, and it can create noise immediately or after a short time. The bearing can be new and already damaged. And when you press the hub into the bearing, the force must go through the inner race, because the hub is an interference fit with the inner race. If you press the hub in while supporting the outer race, again you force load through the rolling elements and damage it. That's the whole game. Support the part that's being press fitted. Outer race into knuckle. Inner race onto hub. Everything else is details. So, wheel bearing replacement on Suzuki Swift, the present style. After you've got the knuckle accessible or removed, you'll typically press the hub out first. When you press the hub out of the old bearing, very often the inner race comes out with the hub and stays stuck on it. That's normal. Don't panic. But don't reuse that race, and don't gouge the hub trying to remove it. If the inner race is stuck on the hub, the cleanest method is a bearing splitter behind the race and a press to push the hub through. If you don't have that, some people carefully cut a groove in the race with a rotary tool and then crack it with a chisel. The key word is carefully. You do not want to nick the hub surface where the new bearing inner race will seat. A tiny gouge can prevent proper seating or create runout. If you're not confident, this is one of those moments where paying a shop to do the press work is cheaper than replacing a hub. With the hub removed, you'll see the bearing in the knuckle. There's usually a snap ring retaining it. Clean the area so you can see the snap ring clearly. Remove the snap ring with proper pliers. If it's rusted in place, soak it and work it back and forth. Don't deform it. If it's badly corroded, replace it. Now press the bearing out of the knuckle. Support the knuckle solidly and press on the outer race. If you're using an on-car press kit, choose a cup that supports the knuckle around the bore and a driver that contacts the outer race evenly. If you press on the wrong diameter, you can crack the knuckle or distort it. If the bearing is stubborn, stop and reassess. More force isn't always the answer. Sometimes you need to clean corrosion, apply heat to the knuckle around the bore, or make sure the snap ring is fully removed and not hiding in rust. Once the old bearing is out, clean the knuckle bore thoroughly. This is not cosmetic. Rust and debris can prevent the new bearing from seating fully. If the bearing isn't fully seated, the snap ring may fit, the hub may press in at a slight angle, and you'll get premature failure or ABS issues. Clean until the bore is smooth, then wipe it clean. Avoid leaving abrasive grit behind. Also inspect the bore for damage. If someone previously hammered a bearing out and gouged the bore, the new bearing may not fit correctly. Now check the new bearing orientation if ABS is involved. Some bearings have a magnetic encoder on one side that must face the sensor. Sometimes it's marked, sometimes one seal looks different, sometimes the box instructions mention it. If you install it backwards, the car may drive fine but the ABS light comes on, or traction control acts up. If you're unsure, compare the old bearing orientation before you remove it, or look for markings and match the sensor side. Press the new bearing into the knuckle by pushing on the outer race only. Slow, straight, controlled. If it starts crooked, back off and correct it. Forcing it in crooked can shave metal, jam it, or damage the bore. When it seats, you'll feel the press load change. Then install the snap ring fully into its groove. Make sure it's completely seated all the way around. A snap ring that's half-seated is a time bomb. Now press the hub into the new bearing. This is where many new bearings die. You must support the inner race from the back side while pressing the hub in. If you support the outer race, you'll push the inner race away, load the balls, and brinell the bearing. With a press, you use a properly sized support that contacts the inner race. With an on-car kit, you choose adapters that pull the hub through while supporting the inner race. If you don't have the right adapters, stop. This is not the place to improvise with random sockets that contact seals or the wrong race. As the hub goes in, make sure it goes in smoothly and straight. If it suddenly gets very hard, something is misaligned. Don't just crank harder. Back off, check alignment, check that you're supporting the inner race, and try again. If your Swift uses a bolt-on hub assembly instead of a press-in bearing, the job changes. You remove the old hub unit from the knuckle by unbolting it from the back, clean the mating surface, and bolt the new unit on. Even then, cleaning matters. Rust between the hub and knuckle can prevent it from sitting flush, causing runout and brake pulsation, and it can also make future removal a nightmare. And you still have the axle nut preload to get right. Now torque strategy. I'm not going to invent torque numbers for your exact gear and axle because that's how people snap bolts or under torque critical fasteners. Use a service manual or a reliable spec source for your exact Swift and your exact axle. But I will tell you what matters and where people go wrong. The axle nut torque is not just tight. It sets bearing preload on many designs and clamps the hub and CV joint correctly. Under torque can allow movement and micro-wear that kills the bearing. Over torque can overload the bearing and also kill it. And if the nut is a stake type, you torque it to spec and then stake it into the groove. If it's a one-time use nut, replace it. If you reuse it and it backs off, you can destroy the bearing quickly and potentially damage the hub and axle splines. Also torque the suspension fasteners correctly, ball joint pinch bolts, strut bolts, tie rod nuts, caliper bracket bolts, and wheel lug nuts. Wheel lugs matter more than people think. Uneven lug torque can distort the hub or rotor and create vibration that gets blamed on the bearing. Always snug in a star pattern and torque properly. During reassembly, keep the ABS sensor area clean. If you remove the sensor, wipe the tip and reinstall it gently. Route the wire exactly as it was, clipped away from the tire and moving parts. A wire that rubs through will give you intermittent ABS faults that are hard to trace. Before you put the wheel back on, do a quick feel test. Spin the hub by hand. It should feel smooth and quiet. A tiny bit of seal drag is normal, but it shouldn't feel gritty or notchy. Check for obvious play by grabbing the hub and trying to rock it. There should not be clunking movement. If something feels wrong now, it won't magically fix itself on the road. After the wheel is on and torqued, lower the car and do the final axle nut torque procedure with the car on the ground if required by your setup. Then stake the nut if applicable. Don't skip the staking because you're tired. That's exactly when mistakes happen. Now the first drive. Keep it short and controlled. Listen for the original hum. Also listen for new sounds, clicking, rubbing, or a metallic scrape that could be a dust shield touching the rotor. Check that the ABS light stays off. If you had to disconnect suspension components, pay attention to steering wheel centering and any pulling. A wheel bearing job can disturb alignment if the strut-to-knuckle relationship changes. If you remove those bolts or if anything looks off, plan for an alignment check. Not because alignment is mysterious, but because tires are expensive and a small misalignment can chew them up quietly. When you get back, do a quick post-check. Feel near the hub area carefully for abnormal heat compared to the other side. Don't burn yourself, and remember brakes get hot normally, so compare like for like. Look for any grease sling if a CV boot got stressed. Recheck that the axle nut stake is still seated and that nothing looks loose. Now, the part that saves you from doing this twice, the top reasons a new bearing fails right after installation. The biggest is pressing on the wrong race, especially when pressing the hub into the bearing without supporting the inner race. The second is incorrect axle nut torque or reusing a stake nut that can't hold preload. The third is contamination and poor seating, rust left in the knuckle bore, dirt introduced during assembly, or a bearing not fully seated against its shoulder. The fourth is collateral damage, hammering things apart and bending the knuckle slightly, nicking the hub where the race seats, or damaging the ABS encoder or sensor. And the fifth is misdiagnosis, replacing the wrong side, or replacing a bearing when the real culprit was a tire with uneven wear or a brake dragging. If you take only one idea from this, take this: bearings don't forgive side loading and they don't forgive press force through the rolling elements. You can destroy them without ever driving the car. Wheel bearing replacement on Suzuki Swift is absolutely doable at home if you respect that one rule and you're honest about your tools. If you have a proper press setup and you're careful with support points, it's a clean job. If you don't, it's still possible, but the moment you find yourself reaching for a hammer because it's almost out, that's the moment to pause and consider taking the knuckle to a shop for the press work. Paying for a press is cheaper than buying the bearing twice, and it's definitely cheaper than replacing a knuckle or hub you damaged in frustration. Do it once, do it clean, torque it correctly, and the reward is immediate. The car gets quiet again, the steering feels tighter, and you stop listening for that hum every time you hit 40 miles an hour.